You will know my name is the Lord. And I'm walking here. I'm walking here.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Groovy.
I'm very excited for Chris Reeve to take me away. I'm going to be honest with you. Welcome to Box Office Pulp, the podcast where we talk about movies on occasion, but more so in this episode because Cody's not here. It's just me and the co-host I have wished for using my wishing stone, Jamie. Say hello, Jamie.
Okay, Mike, I appreciate you bringing me back to life. I don't understand why I was resurrected as a Wendigo of some sort. I appreciate the extra hair. I'm not complaining about the extra hair. It's just, I feel like I'm in a world I never made at this point.
Well, no insult to a live World War I era Jamie, who probably would not have been actually allowed on the front lines due to discriminatory actions.
Lousy doughboys.
I know. I wanted a Jamie for me, and not to be selfish, but a Jamie for me would be a Wendigo. I thought the antlers would look cool.
It's more the longing for human flesh I take issue with, because that just distances me, like, socially. Because, you don't want to be at a dinner party and, look over at somebody you're being introduced to and think, oh, yummy, I'd love to have their calves.
You don't do that?
Not in a way as conspicuous as whenever I'm a Wendigo.
Serious question. Have you ever looked at, like, a human being and thought, like, if they were to be eaten, they might be delicious?
Occasionally. Usually with people who got a lot going on in the trunk, if you know what I mean.
See, I go for more of, like, the meat. I'm dead serious. I can't believe I'm admitting this.
We know you are, Mike.
Like calves, like super muscular calves. Be like, okay, it's like looking at, a really like good cow or deer and like, okay, that they would be delicious. I feel like the same. Or if you see like a chicken with like really big tits. I haven't eaten today, so I don't know if this is like playing into it at all, but
I'm sure that's going to be a KFC commercial soon.
Just the Colonel just massaging a chicken's tits.
Played by John Goodman. I can't wait to see who KFC is going to have fucking the chicken this month. I love their stunt casting.
Japan would love it. Me going Jeffrey Dahmer aside, we're here to talk, which is kind of 80s related, so does that count as a segue?
It was really
he murdered
dark
a lot of people in the 80s. We're here to discuss the most hated movie in the world for reasons that puzzle and confuse us. Wonder Woman 1984.
Yeah, we're going to get this out of the way right up front. As far as this podcast is concerned, Wonder Woman 1984, hot fire.
The hottest of fires. I do want to take 1 second, like not to go into like a discussion. I just kind of want to say a bit of sociological piece on this. Wonder Woman 1984 now is rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's just even critics who dislike the movie seem to be confused by the sheer hatred and discourse of the film, which is interesting. I think the reaction to it would have been very different if it was not put on a streaming service. I think this is kind of a view into the future of what would happen if you're able to completely live tweet a film, essentially. The internet loves to, I've said this, the internet loves to volley hate back and forth. So it becomes one-upmanship once the first person kind of opens the floodgates of like making fun of something. And when you're just making fun of it as it goes, because it's tonally a little bit different, though not that different from most other comic book movies, and you're just live tweeting it, not watching the whole film, and then everyone just starts doing the same, it just becomes one-upmanship of jokes and hates and how much one can dislike it, and the conversation becomes about that and not the actual film. And I think that's kind of a scary prospect of live tweeting a big blockbuster release that we normally would be trapped in the theater for until we can give our thoughts.
And watching with people who are also experiencing that with you and not just making fun of it with you from across the country.
Yeah, I think a lot of it stems from that. We're not going to go with a play-by-play of like here's everyone's complaints, and we're going to we don't have any interest in joining that discussion. I just think Wonder Woman 1984 is going to come around and find the audience will re-find it at some point. It will find its audience, and it will be appraised in history as what it is. It just bums me out something, especially at this time, that's so positive and has such a strong message that is very appropriate for this year, has been completely condemned, and what it's about is been completely ignored. And it's not saying it's not a movie that doesn't have problems, that it's not necessarily as good as the first one, but the complaints are so wild and out there, and it bums me out to see people go in such an opposite direction of the film in an effort to get clout, essentially,
Yeah.
when it's kind of the opposite of what we needed. It's, I don't know, it would have been nice to see people embrace the message of the film. I think it would have been different if it came out a year ago when it was originally supposed to come out. But that's I think live tweeting. I think the ability of the streaming service to do that, and it scares me for what's to come next for any big releases that are to drop on HBO Max or any other streaming service.
Especially with the amount of resentment people are starting to build up towards streaming services like Disney Plus and HBO Max for wanting to bypass studios altogether. Like, a lot of people are going into these movies wanting them to eat shit, since they symbolize what is, in some ways, a necessary but still a very sad turn of events for the movie industry.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not wholly against going straight to streaming due to the current circumstances. I think people need to understand that movie studios need to survive too. And I mean, it's not their fault of what's happening with theaters and what's happening across the country. I think the hate needs to be directed towards correct governmental leaders in that regard, and not movie studios. Saying that, everything I'm going to blame AT&T and not Warner Brothers here did with the HBO Max direct to streaming releases for the upcoming year is absolutely horrible, and fuck them. And I want a lot of those movies' decisions to be reversed now, but that's a whole other can of worm.
AT&T, your internet service sucks. Please do not disconnect our internet service.
Yeah, can you speed up my phone speed data to more than 1 fucking megabit down though? That'd be cool. I've only been yelling at you for 11 months now, so fuck you. Release Dune.
I love that Dune must always be tied to contention no matter what. It's the curse of the spice.
But back to just talking about the lovely film called Wonder Woman 1984, the movie that's been coming out for 800 years now.
We have been trapped in a purgatory of Wonder Woman 84 about to be released for about a solid year now.
So you just rewatched it right before recording.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your, like, now that you know what to expect? And granted, I actually kind of had the film spoiled for me like a year ago. Not intentionally, but it's just one of those things where you're like, this Reddit post has all the information. You just kind of read, like, you just assume it's fake. So you just kind of read it for entertainment purposes. And then, like, a trailer comes out that confirms everything about what the Reddit post was. And you go, fuck, I just spoiled the entire movie for me accidentally.
I know, we've gotten to where Reddit accidentally gets things right a lot of the time now, and I don't like that. I miss being able to just scroll through that stuff and laugh.
I need to get all my movie news from 4chan now, where it's completely false at all times. So now that you knew what to expect going in, what was your takeaway the second watch around?
Very, very clearly nowhere near what the first movie was, both in terms of execution, like overall quality, story, and probably most clearly execution of theme. I think the first film knew exactly what points it was trying to hit, and for the most part hit them expertly. This movie sprays around themes and plot points a bit more like buckshot.
Nebulous comes to mind. Yeah.
It does hit 90% of the points it tries to make. It doesn't hit them anywhere near as well as the first movie did, and you don't come away feeling like you had a very concise message delivered to you, but what it's trying to say and what it mostly ends up saying is, in some ways, more powerful than what they were going for in the first movie. Like, both movies are very wrapped up in the concept of truth. The first movie, it's made very literal. Wonder Woman is given a false narrative about how the world works and about her own birth. Slowly through the process of the movie, she sheds off all of these preconceived notions, and through that kind of achieves a sort of godhood. She's almost like a Jim Starlin cosmic consciousness character at that point.
Oh, definitely.
In 84, we see 1D get drugged back down to Earth by the fiction of a life with Steve that she could never truly pursue. And again, because that's a lot more nebulous, and we don't quite, at least in the third act, we don't get quite as much of a definitive payoff to all that stuff that you get in the first. I understand entirely walking away feeling like, okay, that was some stuff taking place, and I think it had a lot to do with the truth setting you free, but I don't know what to make of it. Again, it's one of those films where you're not entirely sure what it's all about until the end, so rewatching it the second time, you pick up on a lot more ways the themes of truth and rejecting propaganda is woven throughout the story of the film. And I will say, while not as strong narratively as the original, I kind of found myself enjoying the action a lot more this time around. Like, there are some big superhero action set pieces.
Oh, the action is definitely top notch.
So much of Diana Terminator running.
And I didn't even realize she was missing like the sword and shield at all until it was pointed out like a week later to me.
Oh yeah, I love how insistent Jenkins was this time around that Wonder Woman does not use weapons. And specifically notes throughout the film that she hates weapons and will not use them.
Which I like. It gave more lasso of truth action, which was good. It kept that vein going throughout the film to remind you that it exists. Even if it starts getting some weird powers, but it's powers that make sense.
Yeah, I'm fine with the lasso having a bullshit Dr. Manhattan plot revelation powers, just from how nebulous that thing's always been. Technically, it's not even supposed to make you tell the truth. That's just a thing that got inferred after a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's a magic bullshit thing from a comic book. I mean, let's not get like too precious about it.
One thing I can imagine giving people a little pause, I think definitely does play better the second time around, is the movie's structure. If you're going into this expecting something like the first film, or even just something like most Marvel movies, where there is a very clear, very powerful villain established early on, and the rest of the narratives are wrapped around stopping that villain, like, you're not going to find that here. This honestly has more in common with the Ant-Man films, if I'm comparing it to anything at Marvel. This is, up until the third act, a very low-stakes movie, a very, almost a Wonder Woman slice of life story for a great deal of it. You just kind of catch up with Diana, with how she's living her life, and towards the end of the 20th century, her struggling to make friends in the new world, her going around town doing Wonder Woman things without fully revealing herself yet. It very much feels like you just picked up an issue of a Bronze Age George Perez Wonder Woman comic off the rack, and you're just flipping through it to see what Diana and Barbara and Maxwell Lord are doing this week.
It definitely captures the tone of a Perez comic, like not even one of like the necessarily one of the big ones, like necessarily even Gods Immortals or anything like that. Just a random issue that kind of builds into one of the bigger end of year storylines that gets the color palette down, it gets the tone down, it's that Diana specifically, it feels like. That's what I love so much about it. It felt like the first film it definitely had a lot of Perez in it. It almost felt more Rucka in the first film.
Yeah,
This
I
feels
definitely feel that.
definitely like 80s Perez, perfect age Wonder Woman, and all the magical stuff that kind of it has the pacing of it. I think like I appreciate the escalation of the film. Even if it starts to get maybe a little bit too nebulous in its escalation, to me it kept the pace going throughout the length of the picture, which could
I'm never
which could
bored.
be a burden, but I quite liked it. Yeah, you never bored because there's a perfect escalation to what's happening with Max and his powers. Like the way everything snowballs into a gigantic catastrophe is like to me perfectly handled. And that it's a hard thing to handle, like with wishes getting out of control.
That's not something most superhero movies are used to managing. Like, I love how all of the stuff with Max just plays out like a B story that you would occasionally return to in a Bronze Age comic. That wouldn't become the main story until like 4 issues later.
Oh yeah. For some reason I'm reminded of like something happening in the background of like Saga of the Swamp Thing. Like Matt Cable being possessed.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
something you return to and it becomes the biggest deal in the world.
That's what I love so much about how Barbara Minerva and Maxwell Lord were portrayed in this. They're not written at all like characters who are being seeded to become big deals in a cinematic universe or to be like giant comic book villains. They feel like characters from a smaller comic book story, specifically a smaller Wonder Woman story, which often deals with just regular everyday people rubbing elbows with the supernatural and the cosmic and being changed by it.
Yeah.
Like Maxwell Lord is absolutely a dude in an old comic book who gets cosmic power and becomes corrupted and must be stopped within 48 hours.
Which is something I really appreciate about the film is there wasn't larger connotations of and I think that's something people are struggling to grasp, which is Cheetah and Max are built throughout the film to be the villains of the film. Not to say like Cheetah can't go on, and I would love to see more Maxwell Lord, but his story feels complete. Even if it ends on kind of a strange note, it feels complete.
He was taken to Guantanamo Bay after this, don't worry.
Oh, he was tortured and executed, actually. As was his son.
We get Pedro Pascal as his own son in the third film, wanting revenge against Wonder Woman.
Oh, it's kind of racist because his son's Asian.
It's okay, Mike. Magic.
He wished his son not to be Asian?
Well, the son wished for his father's success. We don't know what backwards 80s way they could have meant that.
Did that ever come up in the film?
No, that's a weird thing. As far as the wishing goes, that is one where I will totally admit that plot point is really weak and contradictory. Just needed like an afternoon of rewrites just to get the rules and the consequences clear. Because they give Max such a awesome power that is super unique and I've never seen like in a comic book before. They just make him the Djinn from the Wishmaster series. Like he makes magical deals.
Yeah, and the fact he can choose whatever he wants to be the trade-off of the wish. That's fucking awesome. I don't like Maxwell in the comics that much. To me, he's very generic. There's not anything particularly interesting about him. I don't know why. Like a lot of DC villains, mediums outside of the comics seem to be obsessed with him.
Well, it's funny when you look at the comics, especially the comics from the era this is set in, and Maxwell Lord is just a sitcom rich guy who hangs out with the Justice League a lot and is snooty. Which is another thing I do love about this Max is they're comic accurate in the sense that Max is just a sort of well-meaning buffoon who's not actually evil, but totally becomes evil the second he's introduced to power.
Yeah, which is the more interesting version of Max that I think gets lost a lot, especially in like modern times where he's just Lex with some power.
Oh, the most boring thing ever done with this character was making him full supervillain.
Yeah. And the last minute reveal pretty much setting up why his character is what he is, even if it's part of more of a nebulous, nebulous is the word to me that goes with a lot of the stuff in the third act. Nebulous reveal of his childhood abuse, and that's where his self-truth of where his inferiority complex comes from being revealed to him, and like, oh, there's nothing particularly evil about Max. He's just so obsessed with being self-serving and making up for what happened to him as a kid and trying to prove himself that he's destroying the world around him, which is more or less a perfect description of most people in power and the world at large and where selfishness comes from. Even playing against, I think it was brilliant how the president is played, where he's kind of Reagan a little bit, but also kind of not. And he wants nukes more out of fear than anything else. And when it happens, I think it's a brilliant line where he's told the Soviets are launching nukes, and he just kind of goes, "Well, we would have done the same for even less."
I mean, meanwhile, if that were actually Reagan, he just would have wished for unlimited nukes and destroyed the world.
Immediately, yeah. And I assume for like minorities not to exist or anything. Reagan was a horrible human being.
The worms in my brain are telling me to nuke the sun.
Every actor who worked with him hated him.
He ratted out leftists whenever he was head of the Actors Union in the 40s. Horrible man.
Not even that good of an actor. Anyway,
Bedtime for Bonzo.
Decent bit player. Whenever he shows up to say like 6 lines and something. Ugly man. Glad he died horribly playing with his own poop. I assume.
Vote Democrats, we're saying.
I've gotten lost in the Reagan joke. What were we talking about again?
The complexity of the president in Wonder Woman 84.
Oh, yes. And to me, that was like where like that reveal of Max and like what self-truth is, to me, was more of a stronger point I think for the film should have focused on. Is I think they tried to play too fast and loose with a philosophical idea of truth.
Yeah.
And the first film ends with just the perfect note of you can sum up the entire film with the line, "Love can save the world." You can't really, despite ending on a full-on speech with Dinah, which I love. That's how you end a Wonder Woman story, is Dinah giving a fucking speech. You can't sum up what the film's about, but if you focus solely on like what's going on with Max as the through line for the messaging of the film, then you can get like a more strong point. And it almost feels like Max actually makes a stronger main character in that regard.
Yeah. Well, it's like that moral is interwoven throughout the film. Like, if I had to struggle to find like an elevator pitch for what this movie is about, I guess it would be if you choose to live under delusion and enforce that on everyone around you, you will destroy the world you live in.
You can't build off a lie, which is summed up beautifully in the moral lesson of the opening prologue.
And you see that with other characters like Barbara. Like, I really love how, as Wonder Woman's opposite, Barbara's character arc is played as kind of a diluted female empowerment story, where Barbara is under the impression that she's becoming empowered like Wonder Woman, when actually all of her power and status is just ultimately to serve some dude, and is at the cost of her actual individuality, which is very subtle. And again, it's something that feeds into the overall messaging of the film, but there's like a beat or two missing to really connect it all together.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at a movie like Spider-Man Far From Home, which plays with very, very similar themes and is able to present all that in a way where by the time you reach the end of that film, you can see how everything you've seen up until this point is feeding into this one main message. 84 is a lot more of a ride homer, which again is why it's not an ideal pick for WB's first tweet-along movie.
Yeah. It's hard to even discern. Far From Home I didn't even think about that comparison, but they are kind of perfect side by side. Not necessarily comparisons, but they're playing with the same realm and the same perfect analogy for the times we live in. I think the biggest issue is Diana's story with Steve and the way her wish works confuses the overall concept of truth, because you don't really understand fully what that truth is in regards to this.
I will be confused by Steve's resurrection for the rest of my natural life.
And it's actually quite a simple concept, but they don't hone in. Like, you can infer a lot. Like, I could probably bullshit something together as to how that plays into the larger idea of truth, but really it's just, well, Diana just can't move on. And to me, it's still a good story. It's nice in 84. I like Diana's arc of having to let go. And I think it's summed up great. Steve essentially says, like, I've been dead this whole time. Like, you're not killing me again. I've never been alive since that day. And one of like the best scenes in the movie.
Oh, absolutely.
How it plays into truth, be it philosophically or on a grander like propaganda almost scale, I don't understand.
I've been thinking about this a lot since watching it the first time, and I know the one thing we return to over and over when we've discussed this in private is the baffling decision to have Steve return as some kind of psychic ghost man. They made him Dead Man. He's fucking Dead Man possessing a dude's body, essentially. Instead of just having him come back from the dead. And I've been racking my brain to kind of reverse engineer why they would go that way. Did they not want the stone to have the ability to actually resurrect the dead? But if that's the case, then isn't it kind of a cheat for him to come back as a mind ghost? But as far as I can tell, I think what they were going for was they wanted Steve coming back to life to be at the cost of another man's life. And by that token, to be a lie, something Diana can't have. Like Steve says clear as day, I've always been dead. He was never really back. It was essentially just making some other dude like Steve. Which again, I kind of wish they would have went into lore-wise. Like the idea of Diana just projecting her memories of Steve onto a random dude would have been a lot more interesting than whatever ghost shenanigans are going on.
Yeah, it feels like that's probably where they started. I think if maybe they showed Diana on a date with this guy, maybe at the beginning of the film, or like they meet at like that restaurant she's eating at or something, and because she can't let go of Steve, she can't really see this guy, essentially, and that's why he's chosen. So essentially, she refuses to see him, so she projects Steve essentially through the wish, and there's a way to make it work and a way to make the fact she's living some kind of lie work. I mean, it doesn't make the creepy stuff about the whole thing go away, but instead it's the wish is kind of an island in the overall theme of the picture.
I mean, I do love the idea of Steve's semi-resurrection coming at the cost of the gradual loss of her powers. I like the idea that, like, in the same way Spider-Man's powers are tied to confidence and self-esteem, Diana's powers are tied to truth. Like, even though she's losing her powers for, like, a very, like, literal reason, she made a wish, that was the cost. I love how Wonder Woman cannot exist as Wonder Woman if she's living a lie. Which, again, is something that's built off from the first movie, where the more truth Diana learns and accepts, the more powerful she comes until she's just a living god. Like, I love how only by rejecting Steve and making an earnest attempt to forge on with her life, Diana's able to lasso the sky and fly across the crowds. It's like one of the most beautiful fucking sequences I've seen in a superhero movie in ages.
Oh, that's top 5, I think.
That flying scene and the scene of Diana and Steve flying through the fireworks, like, that is the kind of spectacle that you can only get from a superhero movie. Like, if I were to rationalize why superhero movies are a worthy entry into cinema, how they give us something that only these type of movies can, I would point to that fucking fireworks scene.
Yeah, it's pure awe. After everything that's happened, the last 12 months or so, those two scenes were like a breath into fantasy and just awe that was so welcome. This is why superhero stories exist.
I think that's one of the reasons I've developed so much affection for this movie. There's so much awe and amazement and delight from all of the characters in this movie. Nobody in this movie is a bad time to be around. The most charming character in it is the villain.
I'd buy whatever Black Gold is selling.
I'd let Simon Stagg turn me into Metamorpho.
I'm glad we both had the same reaction to Simon Stagg showing up, which is just pumping
cheering.
Yeah!
Confusing the people around us. Yeah, you were William Sadler for an episode of The Flash. Which Simon is in continuity Stagg with this because of the multiverse.
It's true. I love how Simon Stagg is forever the dude who just shows up for like 2 scenes and never ends up fulfilling the Simon Stagg stuff in the comics. But like that's just what his thing is in live action. He is cameo comic book character.
It's like any time a Roxxon executive shows up.
Exactly.
It's like, you're not going to do any Roxxon shit, but I'm glad that you're here.
The logo's here, so I'm happy.
We'll get CEO Minotaur one day.
Yeah, going back to Steve again, I think it would have been to also get rid of the body swap and play into the lie aspect. I think if Steve was resurrected literally as some sort of intangible being that only Diana could see, but as her powers fade off, he becomes more real.
Oh, yeah. That would, yeah.
Would have been a perfect analogy. I've given this a lot of thought.
We've been working around the clock to make 84 less creepy.
It's true. The creepiness really freaks me out. The fact Patty Jenkins doesn't see it gives me pause. But I think that would have been good because it would have played perfectly into the themes. It would have made the power swap of it more clear, especially like per the symbolism you've brought up. Instead, it almost feels more like just a basic Superman 2 riff. And the fact her powers don't completely go away, she just gets kind of injured.
I do appreciate the makeup team's futile attempt to make Gal Gadot look like shit.
She has some slight battle damage, though honestly not that much more battle damage than you saw like necessarily the first film, so that was interesting. Yeah, I think there's ways to make that work. I think it would have strengthened the overall theme of the picture as well, because I think every movie's theme, especially in superhero movies, the audience is always going to view that theme through mainly the eyes of the main character. So when it's stronger along the lines of the ancillary characters and the greater world, all because it's very readable there, if it's not happening in a clear, concise way to the main character as a way to view it, or if the main character is not viewing it to the world, essentially, it gets lost. So when you have to sit back and go, okay, I have to more clearly understand the movie, I have to remove Wonder Woman from it. That becomes, to me, that's the greatest issue of the picture outside of the creepy body swap part.
I think a comparison we've made a lot the past 2 weeks has been Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, although I will say 84 is a significantly better film than that. There's a lot of ballyhoo over perceived flaws in this movie, which kind of obscures the fact that there are a handful of very serious, very worth talking about flaws that do need to be addressed.
Yeah, I think I wish more people would discuss those actual flaws because they are definitely worth discussing and worth learning from. And I think very important to both the building of superhero movies in production phases or just, general cinema, that these problems are very story building blocks that are not strong foundations for an overall film. And I love the movie. Like, it's to me one of the best as far as superhero movies go. If it was in theaters, I think it would have been a completely different beast. But the certain foundations of where the story is built were not good foundations for what the film was trying to do and hurt pretty much everything about it. And that bugs me. And I think it's worth like really examining and looking at. So these problems do not ever happen again.
Well, you said it perfectly a moment ago whenever you said there's a lot to learn from. Like, the flaws of 84 aren't critical movie ruining flaws. They're a series of teachable moments that I think everyone making these types of movies needs to learn from. Just because 84 goes in so many new directions that are pretty uncharted as far as these movies go, somebody had to plant the flag down first. And when that happens, there's always going to be accidents.
And thank God it does something new. That's something I enjoyed the hell out of it for is, yeah, it does harken back a lot to maybe like Superman or Superman 2 and a few other things. And of course, there's just basic how both superhero sequels work and both how superhero comic book stories work that it harkens back to and takes from. It does so many different things with both how the MacGuffins work, how villains are played, overall structure, overall type of story. The fact it doesn't end on a giant CGI fuckfest of some kind.
Almost as a middle finger towards the ending of the first film, which we now know was semi-forced upon Patty Jenkins.
Yeah. And granted, I do think it goes a little bit too hard in the opposite direction.
I just want more Cheetah fight. Give me more Cheetah. Don't tease us.
I would have liked to have seen Cheetah. I know it's supposed to be nebulous as to whether or not, what's that word again? Nebulous as to whether or not she actually relinquished her wish. And I assume the idea there is that she didn't. If you're playing coy about it, is that she didn't actually relinquish her wish. Just Max taking away his wish removed hers.
They're going to find some reason for Kristen Wiig to be the exact same age in the third movie set in the modern day. So I know we haven't seen the last of Cheetah.
Pretty much. I would have liked to have seen Cheetah just remain in her form there and just kind of, I don't know.
Skedaddle away.
Yeah, but I guess we kind of get the same thing, it ending on a question mark for her, but
that's the one area where I wish they would have just gone the Marvel route and not had her become Cheetah and all, and just save that for another movie. Because I was perfectly fine with this version of Cheetah just being Kristen Wiig in Cheetah print. Honestly, that was even better than her monster look.
She needed to do the transformation a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I don't know why they waited until after the scene where she first kicks Wendy's ass and meets Max, because that was the moment you should change her into Cheetah. Or just have her become Cheetah slowly as an outcome of her wish, like Diana's powers faded.
I did like the bit of her being into cryptids. So when she wishes to become an apex predator, she becomes a monster woman. That was a nice little bit.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen like a scene or two of pre-wish Barbara just to get a bit more beat on her personality, because that was such a nice, I thought that was a really nice take on that character.
I love Barbara, yeah.
I love her identity, like her rivalry with Diana not coming from even like a sense of jealousy or competition, which is usually Cheetah's thing. I like how Barbara's just mad at Diana because she's spoiling her fun.
Yeah.
Like she's just being a fucking cop who's ruining her good time, so she has to go down. Which is perfect for Cheetah.
And the fact that Barbara sees the consequences of her wish, her losing of her goodness, and everything that was real about her that actually made her really interesting and good to talk to, and everything she thought wasn't true about her, like her self-truth. And she's losing all of that, but she doesn't actually care.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I love how I was a bit wary with this take on the character at first from the trailers and everything, because I was worried they were going to do the super cliche, like 90s teen movie thing of, oh, Kristen Wiig's so ugly because she has glasses and frizzy hair, and then she's going to transform into a hot chick by just taking it off and wearing nicer clothes. And they do that, but the film seems very aware that nothing has actually changed about Barbara in that aspect. Like, I love how it's played as though it's entirely a mental change. Like, she doesn't spontaneously become more attractive. She just has confidence all of a sudden, which she's completely deluded about, which I think is really perfect.
Yeah, it's pure delusion. It's so good about that entire transformation. And once again, the fact she doesn't care plays so good up against losing her powers is, oh, I'm becoming a terrible person. I don't care. Like, I want more of that, if anything. It's such a sad fall into villainy at that point, which also plays perfect against Max, who realizes the truth about himself and the truth of what's happening and just wants to make it go away at that point at the last minute. And Barbara's the exact opposite. Just, no, I want to be a complete fucking monster.
Yeah, it feels like an escalation of what they were doing psychologically with Selina in Batman Returns, just played to the magical extreme, which is great because I've always been such a huge fan of that take on Selina. And I like the idea of doing that with a full-fledged supervillain where you can go super literal with that kind of transformation.
What we're saying is more Cheetah, please. Cheetah was probably one of the best parts of the movie. Like, I could watch Kristen Wiig just go through that arc over and over again forever.
Wiig has gotten a lot of shit over the years for being part of an era of Saturday Night Live that's not remembered very fondly, but I've always really loved her as like a comedic actress. She's she's a perfect Dan Aykroyd straight man, and she can be scary as fuck whenever she wants to, as we saw in Mother and in certain parts of this. Like, I would really love to see her spread her wings as like a genre actress after this. Could you imagine a horror movie with Kristen Wiig?
Oh, I would love that. She's such a great, just straight drama actress too. Like, she's like great in The Martian and whatnot. I almost forgot about her in Mother.
Let's not forget her greatest performance in Paul.
Oh yeah, we need to do commentary for Paul.
Best titty farting sleep I ever took.
So yeah, what we're saying is more Cheetah. Cheetah gets a spinoff.
We're getting they announced that fucking trench monster spinoff for Aquaman 2 years ago. Green light a Cheetah movie.
Give us an HBO Max Cheetah series that charts her course from the end of '84 to her regaining her powers at the beginning of the next Wonder Woman movie.
And she meets up with John Cena as Peacemaker.
Yes, and Dr. Psycho is there.
It's still Toby Hale. But I have to say, we have talked shit about DC and WB a lot over the years on a whole spectrum of podcasts. I think it's the one thing that holds the Pulp Podcast Network together. But I have to say, post Justice League, I've been really enjoying a lot of the big swings the DC movies have made. Even for stuff that's not everyone's cup of tea, like Joker and Birds of Prey, I appreciate how distinct and uncharted these movies are getting. I think 84 owes a lot more to those movies than necessarily does even the original, which is still made in kind of the faux Marvel, like regular superhero movie mode. Like I love seeing DC become the studio of big swings.
Yeah, I think that's also the distinctive way to play the DC universe as well.
That's its strength.
Yeah, that's what the comics are all about. It's one universe, but everything is so super distinct from one another. They're so different from one another, and they're capable of very different types of storytelling and tones. And to see the movies kind of embrace that is great and is definitely much needed. And that's not saying I don't buy into all the Marvel movies are exactly the same stuff tone wise or anything else. There's cohesion, but I don't subscribe to that notion in any way. I think that's bullshit. But it has been so nice to see, even if it doesn't work all the time, it doesn't necessarily fit the characters all the time, to see an attempt to let's go the exact opposite of what anybody would expect. Let's take a completely different type of movie and place these characters into it. And that's not to say that 84 is necessarily a completely different type of movie, but it's playing in a different playground. It's not playing by the same type of rules. It's going for not necessarily completely different tone, but hey, you know how everyone kind of goes this way? Let's go this way. Let's go for a different type of color palette. Let's go for a different type of energy. You know, everyone kind of ends in this sort of way. Let's instead end this way, and let's go for this messaging versus something that's more understandable or is so in the background. Like, I love Marvel movies, but I wish their like what they're going for wasn't just used as structure and was more at the forefront.
Yeah, again, going back to like Spider-Man: Far From Home, that's probably the closest, like next to the Guardians movies, that's the closest I've seen to Marvel making a idea movie or a message movie first and foremost, and they seem to be going more towards that direction themselves. So I'm very happy to see other studios kind of laying down the groundwork there and showing what you can do with movies like these.
It's weird to think that Thor: The Dark World is technically about the creation of Al Qaeda by America and Russia. Like that's what Thor: The Dark World is about. It's very strange to think about that.
What are you talking about, Mike? Thor: The Dark World is about Darcy getting an intern.
Almost directed by Patty Jenkins. Ah, we came back around. So even if you don't like 84, goddamn appreciate it. And please rewatch it because it's actually really good. Like really, really good. And I'm really excited to see. I'm excited to get out of the past for Wonder Woman and see what the hell she's up to post Justice League. But
I want to see her on Twitter.
and I'm really interested to see tone wise what Jenkins does next.
I know, because this, as much as there is a through line to the original, this is such a completely distinct film. I want to know what she pulls out of her hat for a third one, because it's not going to be anything like this one, or what came before, or like any of the other DC movies. It's very exciting.
Yeah, and Jenkins has so many different types of movies in this kind of realm that she loves and likes to pull from, that it could kind of be anything.
Watch her do a League of One movie that's just Diana versus a fucking dragon.
Now I really want there to be Diana versus a fucking dragon.
Give us that talking lion we were promised in the first movie. Before we wrap up, one thing I was wanting to do is, Mike, do you want to just do like a lightning round where we just bring up random things we liked about the movie that we couldn't get through in conversation? I just want to nerd out about this movie after talking about it intellectually for an hour.
Sure.
First and foremost, I fucking love how it opens with the one Wonder Woman thing we were not given in her origin in the first movie. The Amazon trials.
Big smile on my face the whole time. Like, oh, and I love her doing that as a child too. That was great.
Oh no, Patty Jenkins delivered on the Wonder Woman version of The Danger Room.
Well, a scene that just every piece of dialogue had to have been written by Johns. Every piece of dialogue just sounded like okay, this is. Johns was like, I'm writing this scene myself. You'll see. It's
Everybody stand the fuck back. The magician is at work. That's another scene that plays so much better the second time, because instead of being confused by what that scene served for the rest of the story, it's like, oh, this just explained the entire movie to us. Okay.
I love prologue to do that.
Speaking of things we didn't get in the first movie, they found a way to deliver on the invisible jet and name-checked it and let that moment be as glorious as humanly possible. Just no chill whatsoever. Here's Wonder Woman's invisible jet. Laugh about this for 10 minutes.
There, it's done. We never have to return to it again.
And we used it for the most beautiful scene in the movie, so you can't say it's tacked on.
And it's magic, like Amazonian magic. So there you go.
I fucking love little details, like side characters having personalities. Like the fact that the mall robbers all have their own personality and conflicting moralities as established in a 5-minute scene. Just mwah.
Oh, yeah. God, the amount of character work that went into this picture. Like you said, like those robbers, like, oh God, he's taking a hostage.
This is too far for me. Like one of them's blonde with like a mohawk and glasses because they're semi-bad dudes.
Which is great, I mean, I don't mean to get like nostalgic, but the movies used to do that shit a lot, especially in the 80s. It's only like more modern where every side character is just kind of there, except for like maybe 2 or 3, especially random goons.
Remember how happy we were in Logan when we could actually point out henchmen?
Yes. Like, it's important to, I think, action movies. Like, henchmen or not even necessarily henchmen. Like, I mean, I would not call Maxwell's assistant a henchman or henchwoman, but everyone who works at Black Gold, you can pinpoint and you remember. And that's really fucking important.
I love the character of Max's put-upon assistant, who he clearly has a very close relationship, and he's deeply upset when he can't find her in the third act. Like there's just an implied, strained friendship there that's existed for many years, and it's without a single line of exposition or any character beats with that assistant. She's DC's Bernard.
She actually also was blown up by Superman in Dawn of Justice. Duke McNary's ass exploded and killed everyone.
I fucking love how this movie hinges on a I don't want power as much as I want my son's love kind of ending that somehow isn't schmaltzy and actually does feel real.
It was very beautiful, yeah. I liked that.
Not to mention, it's just so fucking cool to see Wonder Woman in full costume, doing Wonder Woman shit around town, stopping crimes, Terminator running, which is her signature move in this film.
I would like to take a moment to say that, dear comic book movies, if we can have the superhero lead character fight crime in the movie, that would be great, because this was a rare treat seeing Wonder Woman fight crime and do superhero stuff that didn't have to do with the main plot. We occasionally get that with Spider-Man, and then occasionally it's cut out, like in Far From Home, but goddamn, is it nice whenever that happens? Like, it's weird how it's almost, a lot of times it's bad comic book movies that show that. Daredevil, Ben Affleck's Daredevil is one of the few comic book movies that show the superhero fighting crime throughout the picture that doesn't have to do with the main goddamn plot.
I love how superhero movies have accidentally become early 2000s comics, where the superheroes are just celebrities who hang out in a Big Brother house together.
So much so that it became a plot point in Spider-Man Homecoming, where the Avengers wouldn't actually fight crime and Spider-Man was confused. Also, fun fact, the little black girl in the mall is, because that was filmed in Virginia, is actually local in my state.
Hey!
Yeah, she was actually interviewed in the local news about a week ago.
You're going to be standing across from her at a job interview one day.
Probably. She'll be more qualified. Another local fact, the dude who wished for the farm and just got nothing but cows outside of his house, that is the husband of my local weather anchor.
I was taking special notice of him rewatching that the other night. I was like, wow, that is a kept man right there. That's a proud house husband. Also, going back to like the little girls, I love how much Diana interacts with children shamelessly in this movie.
I'm so glad so many people are pointing that out and loving it. It's like, yeah, more of that, please.
It's like we're only a couple of years away from, well, Iron Man can interact with a little kid, but he has to be mean to him or else it'll be weird. Like, no, superheroes can just be best friends with kids now. It's fine. These are childhood characters. Let it go.
I know. Yes, these are children's characters. Shut up, internet. That's why I know he looks like a monster in the opening scene of Justice League, but I really will always love the video camera, iPhone recorded scene of Superman with the two kids.
If they had just cropped it down to where it was just the S, that would have been my favorite Superman scene in movie history.
Can they just refilm that with mustacheless Cavill and put it back in?
Considering how petty all this Snyder Cut shit is getting, I'm sure we're going to get a Whedon scene recreated with the original cast with no mustache. There, you did one thing right. Jared Leto, what are you doing here?
He broke in using his replicants.
Oh god, he can't see anywhere. He's falling over the furniture.
He can see with his drones. I know we're getting into Blade Runner territory.
I'm done on my hot takes if you have anything else to add.
No, I just really like Wonder Woman 1984, and I want everyone to know that.
We want justice for Wonder Woman, okay? Do not let Wonder Woman 1984 be the final victim of 2020.
It's too late. It is. I just say how I just to go back around, I say how fucking ironic it is to me that everyone rejected a movie with this kind of message, and then like 3 weeks later there was an attempted coup.
Yeah.
I don't want to say everyone's head's in the wrong fucking place, but it feels like, fuck you for rejecting the movie that has the message that is the exact opposite of this. But that's just me putting my foot down.
Yeah, it's been hard not to like cynically shake your head at the amount of hatred this movie about having compassion for everyone, including your enemies, has gotten. It's like, oh, we're not ready for this at all, are we? We're not ready for you, Wonder Woman.
That's why I am confident that it will come back around and everyone will appreciate it. In a world where Superman Returns eventually was appreciated, I think Wonder Woman 84 will get the love that the first film got as well. Grant, I know it stars a lady, which is part of the problem here, but...
And she made that nasty video where she sang for 5 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
I know that was the worst thing that happened in 2020, and everyone is still viscerally angry about hearing about that video and not actually watching it.
Anyway, before we get angrier, if you liked us talking about Wonder Woman 1984, or if you just want to yell at us for talking about Wonder Woman 1984, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Whichever way you like. We just like reading reviews and stuff. And of course, you can find the podcast on boxofficepulp.com, on Twitter at boxofficepulp, Facebook, facebook.com/boxofficepulppodcast, and all other fine places the podcasts are found, such as Amazon Music, Stitcher, I mentioned Apple Podcasts. I can be found at horrormovieshub.com and at Lucky Deck Napier on Twitter.
All right, and you can catch me at Mondo Funky on Twitter, where I tweet every once in a blue moon, and you can check out the back catalog of our many other fine Pulp Podcast Network shows on pulppodcastnetwork.wordpress.com.
Cody's on Twitter too, but he's not here to tell us the handle, and I know it, but since he's not here, I'm not going to say it.
Find him.
Wish for Cody.
No, I renounce my wish.
Unfortunately, the consequences of wishing for Cody is Cody.
He just pops into your apartment and starts raiding your fridge.
I'm going to make a drink.
I have an old beer, some cigarette ashes, and cough syrup. I can make this work.
I called a flaming Cody.
Within hours, the fire department is called to your apartment. It's a real monkey's paw situation. Oh, by the way, I fucking love that this movie just flat out says it's a monkey's paw situation. We've all heard of monkey's paw. We all know how the monkey's paw works. This is a monkey's paw. Let's use monkey's paw logic to deal with this.
Yes, please. Movies, you're allowed to reference like storytelling and stuff to give us like easy explanations. Like, we believe that in the world of movies exist, so you can do that. Like, it's okay.
A vampire in this day and age?
I know, it's appreciated. Not everything has to be, oh my God, people are coming back from the dead. What could this be? Like, you could just be like, oh my God, this is a zombie from all those books and movies and shit. It's cool. It's okay.
I'll always love Robert Kirkman being very, very confused as to why nobody says zombie in the Walking Dead TV show. It's like, geez, I know the Romero movies don't exist, but the concept does. I say zombie all the fucking time in my comic.
Anyway, before we go down another rabbit hole, I renounce this podcast.
This is Box Office Pulp Guy, and this has been a Pulp Podcast production. Now please, 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 put a gun in my mouth and pull the trigger and say goodnight.
And now, on with the show.